They do rate this pose as a 6 on the calming to energizing scale, 10 being the most energizing. So it's up there.
Yeah.
And I would have thought this is like a 4.
Yeah.
But now I can see some of these other aspects to it, especially the variations that we're suggesting.
That's so fun, because when Sarah and I came in and we were talking about this pose yesterday, we're like, we're just going to do something really easy and just talk about something
This will
simple.
be a 20-minute episode. Just not much here.
And we're like, oh my God, this is the greatest pose.
So we have Ustraparighasana.
Yeah, new pose.
And then there's 2 ways to do Ustraparighasana. Well, we could call it like a revolve. Parivrita Ustraparighasana.
Okay. I gotta get my Sanskrit flashcards back out. Happy New Year, Sarah.
Happy New Year, Jane.
I'm Jane, and Sarah's here, and we are the yoga posers, and we're kicking off a new year. And Sarah was pointing out we're doing Parighasana. And I thought, are we doing Aparigraha, which is non-clasping? And I thought, this is interesting. We should do that, but we could.
That'd be kind of fun.
It would be
just as a side series.
Yeah, a little yama niyama, how they work in our life.
Yeah, or how they work with the poses.
Or the poses. Yeah.
Maybe we'll weave in Aparigraha with Parighasana.
Yeah. So gate pose. This is from Lillian and Joe LePage. The asana symbolism is a gate or barrier. And what it does, it represents the healthy boundaries. It allows us to live with integrity and security. With healthy boundaries, we can open our hearts and live with compassion and generosity. That's true.
That connects right back to our last episode about twists and the boundary between left and right and crossing the boundary and then coming back to the boundary of the midline.
Yeah, and using the core as a stabilizer, as a counter twist, that we use part of the core to initiate the twist, and the other part is actually working in opposition to help stabilize.
So many boundaries in yoga, so many boundaries in the body. I was fascinated to learn that the body's more interested in stability than mobility, because I just assumed, of course, our body just wants to move more.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely a left and right brain thing too. There's that great book, Jill Bolte Taylor's Stroke of Insight, where she's a neuroscientist. She has a stroke and she can see her left brain and her right brain working differently. And she knows that when one side of the brain is working, everything's going to merge. There's no boundaries. And she understands that and I think it's the right side of the brain, when the right side of the brain is working, she'll be able to dial a number. But the second the left comes into play, she won't be able to. It's really fascinating.
It's so fascinating that we learn from deficits, that we learn the most about the brain when someone gets injured and we see what's knocked out, what's lost.
Yeah.
And it's through what we lose that we understand how it even worked in the first place.
Yeah. And coming back to Parighasana, gate pose, is we were talking about twists in the last episode, and this is a side bend. But you're going to find a lot of twisting happens in this pose because the side bend is challenging. And the side bend is such a good thing because if we're always talking about gravity, it's just shrinking the space between the ribs and the pelvis. What we need to do is we need to constantly be working to expand that space. And one of the things that I've been reading about recently is when our posture is correct, when we breathe fully into the respiratory diaphragm, that helps support our ribs above, holds them up. And so when we're not in a proper alignment with our torso, we undermine the health of our respiratory diaphragm, which makes it more difficult for us to support the weight of the ribs as well.
So interesting.
Yeah. So all this making space in the side waist feels really good, and it's really, really helpful. And it's going to help the posture line too.
Do you want to take us through the common complaints or the basic outline of what the pose looks like?
I forgot to look up what the common complaints are.
Yeah, I don't really know any common complaints for this from students except kneeling.
The knees, both ways. I think the complaints on the knees this way is one is if you're putting all your weight on the kneecap, on the patella, that's uncomfortable. And then the other is if you lean into the knee joint on the straight leg. If you do not draw in and get a micro bend in the knee joint, that can be really painful. Okay, so this is a pose that is closer to the ground, right? I typically will get people, we'll start a little bit cat-cow, we walk back, come to kneeling on the shins, and then shift the weight to the left and then take your right leg and extend it out laterally, right? So you don't bring it in front of you, you bring it out kind of 90 degrees. And then you reach your arms up to the sky. So you're on one shin, the other leg is extended straight. And I always have done it with the foot perpendicular to the kneeling shin.
Yeah, that's, I think the tricky part is where do you line up the foot?
Yeah.
Is it with the knee? Is it knee to arch, knee to heel? You're saying you do it.
Kind of do arch to knee. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With the outer edge of the foot parallel.
Yeah, and I think as we've done in other poses, playing with that. So if you're leaning over the straight leg, play with where the foot is so that the pelvis can turn sufficiently if that leg is straight out to the side at 90 degrees.
Right. You know, Sarah's use of the blanket under the kneeling shin is really helpful because in a vinyasa class where I don't take the time to put the blanket underneath is going to create a tilt in your pelvis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do usually have people fold the blanket 2 to 3 times in order to make up for the difference in the length of the thigh compared to the length of the straight leg out so that they're at least starting with a level pelvis.
Yeah.
Because I often do this with a bent leg. The straight leg is bent at first.
Yeah.
I call that the Captain Morgan stance, but
I can see that.
But that's actually like a fitness term, but they use it in a completely different way, facing forward with the leg not out to the side. So fitness people, we're not talking about that Captain Morgan, but just
apparently the rum one.
Right, like the pirate one, right? Isn't that?
Well, and that's good because the elongation of the side body is really such a fruitful component of this pose.
Right, because I think this is a great way to start standing poses. Like Jane was saying, you're truncated in one of the limbs, so you're a lot closer to the ground. There's a lot less wiggle room.
Yeah.
Yeah, the broader your base of support, the more you're going to be able to not have to worry about that pelvis shifting around so incredibly much. And so it's a great prep for Warrior 2, for triangle pose, and for side angle pose.
Definitely. So we're here kneeling on our shin with one leg extended out to the side. The first thing I always do is reach both of my arms up and try to get the ribs up away from the pelvis and allow the pelvis to kind of root down. So I'm trying to grow away from my navel in both directions. And then Sarah and I were talking, we both take a side bend towards the kneeling shin.
Mm-hmm. I usually do that first.
So do I.
Yeah. I feel like that's a little easier than leaning out over a straight leg where that knee can lock, like you said.
Yeah.
And certainly this is where a block is really helpful for a lot of people. Body proportion is huge in this pose. So you just may need the block, not because you're remedial, but just to, not distort the body significantly in order to side bend.
Right. And let's say we lean towards the shin, right? I typically will grab the inside arm to try to lengthen the side towards my extended leg because I want that side to maintain the intention of lengthening as I tip to the side, right? Often we bring the ribs close to the pelvis when we do these side bends, which, is a side bend. So you're not going to not do it.
But not a collapse.
But not a collapse. Yeah. It's a lateral tilt in the pelvis, like the teapot when you go towards the straight leg. Yeah, like your pelvis is a big steering wheel and you're just turning it.
Yeah, that's where it gets into that triangle, side angle, hip flexion. Because the trunk is getting closer to the top of the thigh, that's hip flexion. That's going to happen really fast for flexible people and super slow or not at all for stiff people. And the stiffer people will side bend a lot in order to lean over and not tilt their pelvis. So this is a great place to introduce that idea of having the pelvis laterally tilt, the teapot thing. So there's an option in this pose to keep the straight leg faced more internally rotated or more neutral. It's abducted, but it hasn't externally rotated. And that would be very much like a wide-legged standing forward fold.
Right.
And I often do the pose that way first, and that's the way that triangle used to be done. I like the version of the leg is just cleanly out to the side without that external rotation, and actually take people forward with the trunk into kind of a downward dog-ish, half puppy pose with one leg out to the side in order to deepen the groins, release tucking.
I love that too. It's kind of downward dog, but I feel like it's more extended tabletop.
Yeah.
And then I do cat-cow or pelvic tilts.
Yeah.
Because it's really fun to see, it's really nice to feel in your body the difference in the opening of the groin when you have your pelvis a little bit asymmetrical, and you can kind of send the hips back and forward a little bit.
A little rocking.
So it's really nice to gain some freedom.
Yeah, I don't think I've done that. That would be nice to try. And then to get people to tune into when the pelvis tilts a little bit more posteriorly. Hopefully you're doing that through some zipping up, from some abdominal engagement. And then you come upright, and the bent leg, that hip is extended, right?
Yep.
Even though the thigh is perpendicular to the floor, that hip is now somewhat extended. So we're looking for not too much anterior tilt in the pelvis. We're looking for neutral or cueing towards slightly posterior. And then if you choose to now take the leg externally, rotate it from the hip externally, then we certainly want a lot more of that posterior tilt cueing, because that's not what happens enough. In triangle pose, we always see that thigh rotating in, the knee twisting in. We see that in Warrior 2. We see that in side angle pose. So getting it here in this simpler Parighasana pose, get that sit bone to line up with the straight leg heel, to line up with the knee. So you've got the back edge of your sit bone lined up with the knee, lined up with that heel.
You know, I want to try that because I lubricate my hip joint by coming in and out of a low lunge and then moving my leg out to the side and then coming to 90 degrees and just in and out and in and out, in and out. But when I've got my leg externally rotated here as well, you're looking for a different orientation of the head of the femur bone in the acetabulum. And it seems like it already feels sticky to me just thinking about it.
Yeah, I think doing what you're saying, just don't even go to the straight leg. Actually just keep it bent, Captain Morgan stance or that pirate stance, and then lunge into it. It's a very different kind of low lunge variation and super great for hip starting to coax the hip open. But because the leg is out to the side, again, as soon as those toes are pointing out, turning out 90 degrees, we want that to come from the hip. And because people are weak in those deep lateral rotators, that's the leash for the Doberman. We're trying to really get the rotator cuff of the hip to secure the hip in the socket and to really
give a boundary
and really the standing poses that are lateral poses or open stance poses are all about driving the hips into the socket. As soon as your legs are wide, the head of the femur is supposed to drive into the pelvis and this corn cobbing of the hips. This is the most beautiful part of the stability that then creates a hip opening.
Right. That sounds really cool. And, thinking of it too that way, one of the things that invites is the idea that we're really trying to draw into the core. Like the energy is pulling in. Often what I see with people who are pretty flexible is they almost want to go to a side split, and there's this energetic spill out to the sides that doesn't feel very safe. It doesn't look very safe because, we need that integrity. I love moving the limbs from the core, and the second they start taking the lead and running away from the core, it's hazardous.
Once we go to the straight leg, then you flex the ankle and anchor the foot against a wall.
Oh, yeah.
So then it's very closed chain. It's even more compact, and you get this feeling of the hips driving in. But to help those flexy people realize the stability they don't have, you could do the opposite and place that heel on a blanket that could slide.
Oh, yeah. So
then
have to pull it in.
They have to pull into the center, and they realize how much they just go into maximum length always.
That's great. I was thinking too, in a prep for this, I love to check out my ability to tilt my pelvis by standing on a block. And then I try to lower one leg. I try to lower the heel down, not the toe, only by tilting the pelvis and then lifting the pelvis up and going down and up with whatever range of motion is available to me that I can do without sticking my butt back, without turning, without bending the knees. I'm just I'm just warming up that little joint on that side, and then I'll go to the other side and do that. And that's also really good information, because then you have an idea of what is really available to you. So if all of a sudden you go into this pose and you're like, woo, then it's probably coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think you first introduced that for tree pose, a single leg stance. It's interesting how tree pose is a base for this pose.
Yeah.
Again, like how starting with something like a single leg stance, which seems in a way harder, actually prepares you for this. And I think that really gets to that corn cobbing action we're looking for, the outer hips moving in towards the inner hips, is when you stand on that block and you slowly with control lower the pelvis on the free leg that's hanging off the block. The standing hip, that corn cob really needs to push in at the same time. It really needs to push because the easiest thing to do would just be let the hip that's standing let that kick out to the side. And so basically you're just trying to bring one side in, the other side gives. And that's what happens in triangle pose. And this is what happens in Parighasana. So the kneeling leg hip, that has to be corn cobbing in from the greater.
What happens in tree pose.
Yeah, the greater trochanter has to drive in. So the head of the femur is driving into the socket and getting that compactness in the pelvis. Then all that sensation is going to now come up into the side body.
Yeah.
Stretching the side body is driving the intention of the pose to where we should feel it. If you're just relaxed through your base, you're not going to feel much side bend necessarily in this pose.
No, you know what I love about talking through these poses with you is because I look at a pose, I think, this is our warm-up pose. This is like a toss away. And then I think, we should do 6 poses before that to get to this. And all of a sudden I realize that the pose is whatever we make of it. And this I want to offer out to teachers or students who are listening. I always feel that whatever practice you go to, it is your opportunity to benefit from the practice wherever the practice is, right? So if you're doing gate pose and you're thinking this is a blow off pose, well, you have the opportunity to make it a lot more challenging because there's much more to be offered in these simple poses than we initially suspect. So
yeah. And teachers can run with this. You could focus it all being on the side bend. You could focus it on the twist. You could focus it on the ankle plantar flexion or dorsiflexion. You could focus it on the hips. You could focus it on building up to camel pose with that kneeling leg and working on that hip extension. And when you do this pose really well, you're getting a nice TFL stretch. Such a tricky, difficult muscle to stretch at the front of that kneeling leg.
You know, and I'm even thinking about this as we get into the pose. We talked about getting into the pose and one of the complaints being the knee pain, kneeling on the patella. Often what I'll do is I'll come to kneeling first, right before we've extended the leg. And I have people lean back in space, keeping their torso straight so that they activate their quads and then press into the shin, right? Press the belly of the calf down to the earth. You're not going to touch your shins onto the mat, but you do shift the base of the pose to the center of the calf and away from the knee, the top of the knee. And this is more difficult if you have a difficult time pointing your toes, right? Because then what happens is your shins come off the ground because the base of your pose is the patella and the top of the foot. And that's where, everyone should be using a blanket.
Right, and have the whole shin supported by the blanket versus just the knee, so that there's that platform that makes it a little bit easier to point the foot in that extreme way.
Yeah. And you can have the foot hang off the blanket.
Yeah, absolutely. The foot should be off the blanket. Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think this is where we get into some tricky cueing for where should the pressure be on the knee. And so like say we're kneeling in Virasana, you would often pull the skin of the front of the shin up towards the kneecap and towards the thigh to take pressure off that quadricep tendon. But when you're kneeling vertically, often I've heard it cued that you bring the knee a little further back and kind of slide the skin towards the foot, the opposite direction, and come off of the patella, and you're kneeling more at the base of the quadricep muscle.
Okay.
And I mean, at this point, I just use a lot of padding. I have patella alta. My kneecaps are too high.
Okay. No, it's something new. Didn't know that was an issue. Okay.
Right. Which is, so a little, so I usually do have to kind of fidget.
Yeah.
With how I get my kneecaps to
cooperate.
cooperate with these kneeling poses. And I would say for the yoga teachers out there, as a point of pride, I never used a blanket to kneel. I was like, I don't kneel. I still kneel straight on the wood floor. And after 30 years,
I know.
I really regret
every time
not using a blanket
So whenever
more.
I use a vinyasa class and I tell them to bring blankets, I get, it's too much.
They
It's
think
too
you're going to
many
do
variables.
a restorative class.
Well, and then they all think it's going to be restorative. And then I get into this point where I'm like, oh, let's do all this core work where we slide the blanket out and hug it back in. And, all of a sudden I'm like in the blanket in a way that's just confusing to people.
It dominated.
I've taken it over. But I think the rule of thumb is do not kneel on your patella. That will be the least pleasant way to be on your shins in a kneeling position. And I think coming to our shins, not our knees, is just a good way to speak of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to just get around the cueing. People who can't kneel, this pose is hard.
Yeah, this is not the one you're choosing to. I don't know. I'm thinking you could probably do this on a chair somehow.
Probably.
Yeah, you have
You just tuck that one leg back and then.
Yeah, this one comes down. The shin comes down.
But then the
knee
seat
comes
is
down.
too wide.
You have to be on the corner of the seat.
I do like the variation of this pose where you take the straight leg and put it up on a chair. So the leg is parallel to the floor.
Wow.
So it's getting closer to, I don't know, I want to say a half moon.
It's like half moon. Yeah.
It's kind of like a half moon.
I often do this after I go from gate. I go to kneeling half moon pretty much always, right?
So then you would lean away from the straight leg.
And you go away from the straight leg.
And then
place
float
your hand down,
that.
And then reach the straight leg back off the ground.
That's nice. And whenever we do these things where we're floating a leg off of the ground, think gluteals.
Yeah.
It's all, how do we recruit the gluteals? So then you're looking for some external rotation, even though in the yoga world, there's a lot of, at least in old school, a lot of internal rotation cueing. I would say look for at least some external rotation, if not a lot, in order to recruit those deep lateral stabilizers, the leash for your Doberman.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then also just to carry the weight of the leg. Because if you have too much internal rotation, the weight of the leg is carried by the sacral area and the lumbar area.
Okay.
And it gets just really challenging. Like the low back can't hold up the weight of the leg, nor should it.
Okay. I'm going to play with that because usually what I tell people is like engage your core and be really committed with that leg that's up off the ground.
Is the leg internally rotated when you're trying?
No, it's just straight out.
The toes are pointing to the ceiling?
No, the toes are straight ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you still have gluteals on the side of your pelvis, which I think then can help with that.
What I found is pretend there's a wall there and you're pressing into the wall. That kind of energy, not the full going on through the wall, but that sort of like really committed, hugging in, using your core creates a lightness.
I want to try it.
Okay, here we go. Sarah's going to do it.
So after playing with that half moon variation that Jane was talking about, I feel like it's a lot of glute medius.
Yeah.
It's the side of the pelvis holding the leg. And it just that isometric sense of wanting to turn the toes to the ceiling, I think is helpful to recruit some of those fibers. And if I let the toes turn towards the floor and the heel towards the ceiling, which definitely happens when people do half moon or this variation, you can get a lot of lumbar arching and the butt kind of sticks out and gets really full.
In addition, when you do the kneeling half moon, it's really a glute medius strengthener, stabilizer. And this is another way you can keep working that is if you lower the extended leg, lift it up.
I was just thinking that.
Yes. Yeah, outer heel up. And do it with your core and do it with your breath. And because these muscles, the glutes are so big and they're so helpful and we frequently don't use them correctly. So
yeah, the outer heel up is the only thing I might counter with that.
I'm trying to get you not to lift your toes.
But I think I want a little bit of that external rotation because I feel like the more internally rotated the leg is, when you abduct it, you're using the TFL, that tensor fascia lata, that muscle that we're trying to calm that muscle down. It's very overactive. But there's lots of people come in and their physical therapists have assigned them some variation of side lying hip abduction with some internal and with external. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe they figure I'm just going to strengthen both. TFL is an acronym for that muscle. The tensor fascia lata, it's a muscle at the front corner of the hip. It helps to tone the IT band, which is a massive stabilizer of the leg so that when you put all your weight on one leg, you don't fall. And so that muscle tends to get very dominant in opening the leg out to the side and stabilizing the hip to the withering and the atrophying of the bigger gluteal muscles, which
Right.
are supposed to offer the bulk of our hip stability and abduction prowess. So I guess I shy away from that sort of internal rotation unless I'm getting someone who's like really tucking, really round. They're in that Halloween cat shape as they were to try to lift and lower the leg.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, I think either you're starting the class with some side-lying hip abduction, a clamshell or a straight leg, and then you're carrying it over into this pose, then you're building up to half moon. It's like a great sequence with a lot of continuity.
It is. And you can play with it at every level. You know, it can become a little more challenging. You can add a little more balance challenge. You can add a little more, back bend into it.
I'm just wondering, I've never tried camel pose with one leg out to the side like this.
I have.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering like what value there, it's just not as strong of a demand on, you're not having both hip flexors have to lengthen maximally.
Yeah.
But someone
I've done
should
it
try
before.
it.
Yeah, you can try it. You tell me what you
It might be sort of a beginner way, not beginner,
a little bit
warm up
easier
way to get to camel. So even just play with it, obviously block on the tallest height.
Yeah.
Or you can, again, props, but if you can put a bolster across your calves, that's a great way to raise the floor, where people aren't like flailing for a block, terrified.
Yeah. It's also interesting because it gives you a real touch sensation feedback on your shins and your calves, which is really what you want the base of the pose to be.
The shins pressing down,
Yeah.
the shin pressing down. It's singular here in this case. So what we're talking about is Parighasana with the upper body vertical, and you take the hand that's on the same side of the kneeling leg. How can I say that better? The kneeling leg hand.
Yeah, the kneeling leg hand.
So you take the kneeling leg hand back towards the bolster or the block or your foot. And I found, because I'm not warmed up, lots of twisting compensation, but it kind of gave me a nice opening in both legs.
Cool.
And this is how new poses get created.
Yeah.
Is people just kind of mess around with these shapes and then say, okay, I'm going to do it this way. And what happens? And does it offer me anything?
Right.
So you can go forward into the pose, release the pelvis back. You can go backwards into a camel, one-legged camel. A camel trying to get up off the ground. Camelgasana.
Just the poor camel.
Well, it's Ustrasana for camel, so it's Ustraparighasana.
Yeah, I think that sounds like
We've just made a new pose.
Yeah, we've just made a new pose, I think.